You are now listening to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. This is the first ever episode where I have a co-host. My very own wife, Bethany Bernardo, is with me on the show today to talk about an issue that we've been discussing a lot over the last couple of weeks. Bethany, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, going to be really exciting. So we have this thing coming up in Kentucky in a couple weeks called an election, and it's happening in actually every state in a few weeks. And we have in the state of Kentucky a couple of really interesting measures on the ballot. Our state is proposing two constitutional changes. The first one has to do with when our General Assembly or our Congress can meet, and the second one has to do with, it's not really an abortion ban, but it would certainly restrict abortion access in the state of Kentucky. And so as libertarians, we have a lot of complicated issues about abortion, and so we've been talking about whether or not we're going to vote yes or no for this issue, because we can kind of see both sides of it. But before we get into that bill specifically, I kind of just wanted to talk about our perspective as libertarians on abortion. Of course, I did an entire episode about how complex this issue is from a libertarian standpoint. I think it's episode 10 of the show if you want to go back and listen to that. But we have a certain perspective towards abortion as Christian libertarians, and it's very difficult to kind of figure out how how that translates into the way that we vote. So, Bethany, since you're here and you are a woman, and it's great to actually have a woman on the show to talk about this issue. As a libertarian and a Christian and a woman, what are your thoughts on abortion? Like, how do you feel about all of that?
Obviously, as a Christian, I am against abortion. I would personally not have an abortion, but I'm not going to pretend that I grew up in a different environment, was raised in a different environment than I was. I was very blessed and fortunate to have a stable family that I knew would support and love me no matter what. And as a Christian, I realized that we live in a broken world and not everyone has that opportunity for me. So I would personally never get an abortion and don't believe in it, but I'm not going to pretend that I know everyone's life situation as well.
Yeah. And I kind of feel the same way. It's one of those issues where I definitely feel like as a Christian, there's no way biblically to justify abortion at all. It can't be done. And in the earlier episode, we looked at a book that Michael Gorman wrote on abortion, where he just talks about how, like, consistently throughout Second Temple Judaism and the early church, all of those that believed in, the God of Israel constantly rejected abortion, although they did extend grace to people that got that. And so there's just no way for me to reconcile it biblically. The challenge for me is that, again, I understand that, like, all of our positions, especially as Christians about abortions, are based on, like, our theological presuppositions. And so because I don't think that abortions are moral because I believe in God. However, the challenge is, should I then take that belief, which is derived from my theology, and impose that upon people that don't share my theological worldview? That's where this real challenge comes from. And so as we're kind of breaking down the Kentucky issue today and talking about why we're leaning towards voting no on the abortion ban, I want to keep that in mind, and also just to remind you guys as our listeners that, like, there are a lot of different ways to look at this issue as a libertarian, and even the people within the Libertarian Party of Kenton County, we've kind of had conversations about this issue, and there are some people that are very strongly in favor of voting yes and making sure that abortion is as restricted as possible in the state of Kentucky, and they do so on really good libertarian grounds. And there are people like us that are leaning towards voting no, who are also doing that on very strong libertarian grounds as well. And so as we get into this, if you don't agree with what we're saying, like, as always, reach out to me. I would be more than happy to have, like, this conversation again with somebody who is going to vote yes, and I would love to have that idea expressed on this show too. But we just want to really kind of take a few minutes to break down what we think about this issue today. Anything else you want to add to this before we get into the article and then the text on the abortion law?
I think abortion is a symptom of a greater problem, not the problem that we face. And I think it is challenging for us to want to control that symptom when we live in a broken world and serve a God that had to send his son to help us with our own sin. So then trying to determine what the outcome of other people's sin in the broken world we live in is going to be super challenging, especially to do at the government level.
Yeah, what would you say are some of like what would you say are some of like the root problems? Again, I totally agree with that. I think that abortion is like indicative of like kind of these greater social and moral issues. What are some of the root issues that we should be trying to address before we handle the abortion thing?
Absolutely. I think that our family centers are poor. We don't have great family dynamics in general. Not that the government should be involved in that either. I think that we don't have a strong healthcare system. I think our healthcare system is super broken.
Because of the government.
Because of
course,
the government. Yeah. And I think there's not a lot of education out there as well. A lot of
also
people
because of the government
still live in areas where they don't know what their options are, even if they still want to get an abortion. So those three combined create this symptom of all of those problems.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And that's the thing about a lot of these political issues that's really frustrating from my perspective as a libertarian. It's like we think that there's like a one-size-fits-all solution, either a conservative solution or a progressive solution to all these problems, when in reality there's not. And there are a lot of different ways to look at these issues, and they're all very complex. So one of the beautiful things about libertarianism is that it takes the power dynamic out of all of these really complicated social issues and allows people to resolve those at the personal and the communal level instead of just trying to impose one system on everybody else in society. I totally agree with that. So there's a really good article. We're going to kind of break down a couple of pieces of this article on the show today, and it comes from the Lexington Herald, which is, I would say, probably the most popular newspaper in the state of Kentucky. Out of the
premier newspaper in the state of Kentucky,
the premier newspaper in the state of Kentucky. Unfortunately, the Lexington Herald leader he usually leans pretty hard to the left, but the article that they had on this one, I was surprised there wasn't a lot. I mean, there are definitely some undertones of progressive propaganda in the article, as there is with everything that's published by the Lexington Herald. But this one does a pretty good job of explaining the issues at hand. And so we're gonna break down the article real quick, kind of interpret it, and then we're actually going to look at the text of the proposed constitutional amendment that we'll be voting on in a couple of weeks, and just explain why it's a lot more complicated than it might appear on the surface. So the article is entitled "Future Abortion Access in Kentucky Could Change Drastically with This Amendment Vote," which is, again, a very politically neutral headline. It's kind of shocking to read a headline that doesn't say something like this vote is going to take away the rights of all women to do anything everywhere in the world. So I commend the Lexington Herald for editorializing the article in that way. And it's written by another Alex Acquisto. I hope I'm pronouncing that person's name correctly. And Austin Horn are the two authors for this, and it was updated on October 17th. I will post a link to this in the show notes. But this proposed amendment is going to be Amendment 2 on the ballot. We will briefly talk about Amendment 1 because I do think that it's included and these two might be connected in some way. But here's what the article says. It says, "Confused on what Amendment 2 means for the future of abortion access in the state? Here's a breakdown of what happens with a yes or a no vote. For the first time in recent memory, Kentucky voters have a chance to weigh in on the future of abortion access in the state this November. There are two constitutional amendment questions on the November 8th ballot that require a yes or a no vote. Both would give lawmakers more control in different ways." That last
red
sentence.
Flag.
Anytime lawmakers are given more control, it's almost always a bad. No, it is always a bad thing. Giant red flag. So there's libertarian warning number one. So constitutional amendment number one. It's wordy and will run almost the full length of the ballot sheet. It will ask voters if they want to drop constitutional rules that end regular legislative sessions in early spring and allow lawmakers to call members back for 12 additional business days later in the year. Currently, the governor is the only person who can call a special session. So I do want to talk about that real quick. It's going to be on the ballot before the abortion issue, and I think one of the goals possibly of the way that this was put on the ballot is to kind of it exhausts the people that are voting before they get to the real juicy one, which is Amendment 2. Bethany, what do you think about giving our state's lawmakers more time to inflict their laws upon us?
I obviously disagree with that. I think it's loaded. I also work in a business world where I think you can do most things over an email. So why would they need more time to decide things that actually don't help the state of Kentucky?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Now, again, there is kind of a libertarian argument to be made here too. And in our libertarian chat group for Kenton County, Kentucky, there are some people that are voting in favor of it, and their basic argument is that, like, look, these people don't do anything, so we should at least hold them accountable to do their job. If the governor feels like they need to convene for a session, and I definitely understand that, like, put the screw, like, you should actually have to earn your keep if you're going to be a dirty politician. But on the other hand, I would love a constitutional amendment that completely abolish the state government too. I think that would be great. And so from my perspective, I think that this just gives them more time to, as I said, inflict their legislative will upon the people. And so I'm gonna probably be voting no on that. Although, again, if you're a libertarian and you have really great libertarian reasons for voting yes on that issue, I would obviously love to hear them too, and I even maybe have you on the show to talk about it. So that's the first one. It does. If we've kind of looked at a mock ballot online, and it is very, very wordy. And so that kind of obscures the second question. So the writers of this article go on. They say the second question, constitutional amendment number 2, will ask voters if they want to change the wording of the Kentucky Constitution to make clear that there is no protected right to abortion. It's the product of a Republican-backed 2021 law, one of those after the Dobbs decision trigger laws that would immediately invalidate abortion in the state of Kentucky, which actually was a lot more complicated back when Dobbs was passed in the summer than might have initially appeared here. So they go on. Here's how the question will be worded, and we're gonna read the entire legislative text later on. This is their summary of it. It says, "Are you in favor of amending the Constitution of Kentucky by creating a new section of the Constitution to state as follows: to protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. If the amendment is passed and the Constitution changed, it would not equal an abortion ban. But if Kentucky's laws restricting abortion are legally challenged, courts cannot interpret a right to abortion as existing within the Constitution because the amendment plainly states it is not a protected right. The General Assembly then would become the sole arbiter of state laws and regulations impacting abortion access." So again, what this is going to do is essentially make it to where if there's going to be any movement at all on regulation, it would have to come through the state legislature instead of through the courts or through executive action, at least purportedly. Now, although we know that, like, the executive branch and the judicial branch often have ways of overcoming the legislative branch. And so they go on, and I'm going to let you come in on this here in a second. In other words, if the yes side wins and the Constitution is changed, there is no legal recourse, no legal path to challenge the Constitution, said Western Kentucky University political science professor Sandra Audrey said. What are your thoughts on that first part of the article there?
Well, I think it's still pretty, like, nebulous the way they're putting this, because basically, if you've seen any commercial or heard anything in Kentucky, it's like, you either want to fund abortion and you want to kill all the babies, or you don't want women to have any rights. Those are the two options they're laying out. And they make it sound like it's going to immediately, if you vote yes, everyone, no one can have an abortion ever. I want to be clear here and say this is about the Constitution in Kentucky. They want to alter the Constitution in Kentucky to remove this under reproductive rights. And that is what's actually happening. Nothing is going to immediately happen after the vote comes, but there's still some seedy things happening behind the scenes here, which is why we're voting on this in the first place. Those trigger laws went into effect, and they are trying to keep those in place. But this vote is only about removing it from the Kentucky Constitution, which everyone's making it sound like it's you want abortion now, or you don't want women to have rights.
Right. Yeah. Well, or not. Yeah. Not so much removing it from the Constitution, but like adding to the Constitution the idea that it could never be interpreted in a way that would justify abortion. Yeah. And again, it's like you said, there are so many other issues that are wrapped up into this. It's not as cut and dry as it would immediately appear on the surface. Right. Well, and then again, you make a good point. And I think they're going to get to this a little bit later on in the article that like with all other issues, like people, like most American voters, they love slogans. They love easy solutions. They think there's a one size fits all problem. And I think even the biggest thing too is that people love that emotional appeal, because again, like if you're a progressive and you can protest and say they're taking away the rights of women. I mean, that's not really what's happening there.
Right.
It's not saying that women can't, drive cars and go to work and they have to wear skirts. Like we're not stripping women of all of their rights. Now, this might be from a progressive perspective or even from the perspective of a libertarian that doesn't share our Christian worldview. This might be an abridgment from that perspective of a particular right that certain women have. But it's not a referendum on whether or not our society has given women rights. Yeah, and in the same way that this isn't the same thing. Now, I agree from a conservative perspective or from a Christian libertarian perspective, the problem of killing a baby in the womb it is a real problem. But it's not. This isn't like the Holocaust. You know what I'm saying? Like, and just because the state allows abortion doesn't mean that
you can you have to choose to have one.
You do. Well, and it's just like, again, that classic Rand Paul moment in the presidential debates when the moderator asked him whether or not he would legalize heroin, and he said that he would, and everyone was real offended by that. And then he just said, well, just because it's legal doesn't mean that everyone's going to go out and start doing heroin tomorrow. Right. And it's the same thing with this
just
issue as well.
Just because it's in the Constitution as being able to doesn't mean everyone is going to immediately go out and have an abortion.
Right. And it's just like, and I know that like my libertarian audience is going to be immediately aware of this, but it is indicative of how stupid our politics has become in this country that we can't even have a real nuanced conversation without everyone thinking that it's going to be the apocalypse if they don't get their way, which is, again, kind of going back to like my overall concern about this is at the end of the day, it's going to give the state legislature more power to define what is and is not an abortion.
Reproductive right, honestly. And I think this is the bigger issue here, is not about abortions, because again, abortion isn't a symptom, not the problem. If they're going to try to adjust what is a reproductive right, first we need to figure out like what Kentucky defines abortion as. And two, then it's a slippery slope. You can do whatever you want now. If you remove that as a reproductive right, that's all about timing of when you can have a child. So now they can tell anyone when they can have a child.
Yeah. And I know that some people will say that might not be a possibility, that might be an errata, but it is. Look, we live in a state where it is a crime to possess marijuana. And we live in a state where you cannot legally open up a casino without a very complicated government license, and it's only in some.
It takes one weird dude to make it worse for everyone. So we should not let anyone have that kind of power where they can just ruin everything for everyone. Right.
And it's true, and I'm sure that this is true all over the country, but the conservatives in our state are really, really bad on almost every issue, and the progressives in our state are really, really bad on almost every issue. Power? Right. That's exactly right. And again, this doesn't mean that I want to see abortions happening, because I would love to live in a world where there were no abortions, where there wasn't a market for it, But
that's also up to us. Like as Christians, we both feel strongly. Like if you have a problem with abortion, go out and do something about it. Like if you really feel strongly about it, make sure that your family's in check, make sure that your friends have support, make sure that people have access to things. Like that's up to you. Right. That's not up to the state.
Right.
The state shouldn't worry about that at all.
Right. No, that's exactly true. And again, we talked about this a little bit in episode 10, so you guys can go back and listen to my spiel on it. But you and I went through the process of trying to become either foster parents or adoptive parents. And in the state of Kentucky, it is so difficult to adopt a child. And you essentially, or if you want to become a foster parent, you essentially have to give up all of your
everything.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe we can just talk about that for a minute, because I know that we came to an agreement at the end of the process that it wasn't with the child that we already have, that it wasn't going to be feasible for us to give her the life that we wanted her to have and still participate in the foster system. Maybe you talk about how broken that is too, because I know you're very passionate about that.
Yeah, of course. If you are passionate about, helping people, if they don't want to have an abortion, you want to adopt that child or foster that child, the foster system will tell you your total support system will change, and you have to basically not have a job in order to take care of the child. And it's unfortunate they have to have all of those laws in place because so many people have abused it. But at the same time, it's nearly impossible to live the life that you currently live and then also foster a child. Or even adopt one. You can get $40,000 in the hole, and then someone can say, "Nope, I want to keep the baby," which is great if they want to keep the baby. But it's so expensive for that choice, and so they make it hard to help people even if you want to say like, oh no, there's another option. So yeah, challenging.
Yeah, and then too, just again, being a public school teacher, I've had a lot of kids that have been in and out of the foster system, and I've met some incredible foster parents. Like there have been some that have been really great, but then we've also had kids that have gotten taken from foster parents for abuse and neglect. And
terrible.
Well, yeah, and what a lot of people don't understand is that if you become a foster parent, that comes with a big government check every month. Like every foster kid that you bring in.
I wouldn't say big government.
Well,
check.
I don't know, it's $1,400. I mean, it's like you're making like teacher money by by fostering a child, you know. And so we've had parents that have gotten in trouble with the law and had their foster children removed because they were able to go through the classes and kind of meet the minimum requirements and I guess put on a good show when the state came and checked in on them on a monthly basis, but they were abusing and neglecting their kids, and we were able to figure it out through the schools. And so this isn't the perfect system. And then if you think about like how expensive it is to adopt a child in the state of Kentucky, let's say we're going to keep the tax rates of the state of Kentucky equal to what they are right now. Wouldn't it be better if the money that we pay into that foster system was then given to like parents that wanted to adopt these kids and get them out of that system to you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's super complicated with all the legal stuff, especially the health of the mother.
Yeah.
But moral of the story is state-run programs are broken.
Right.
And so why would we want them to have any more power than they already have?
Right. Yeah. And then there's also some other problems with, I think, the language of the constitutional amendment as well. And I want to get to that. A couple more paragraphs from this article before we actually take a look at the text here and then kind of talk about the background of it. So this is from the article in the Lexington Herald. It is coincidental that the question of whether to revoke any right inherent in the Constitution comes before voters now when tension over abortion access in Kentucky have reached a fever pitch. And as the Kentucky Supreme Court is scheduled to decide whether abortion is an inherent right protected by the state constitution. For Amendment 2 to fail clearly would do nothing to state law because it means the Constitution wouldn't change, said University of Kentucky political science professor Stephen Voss. But it's indirectly serving as a referendum that the Kentucky Supreme Court will be observing from voters before they weigh in on their own decision. So they're going to talk about the background here. I think it is really important in the state of Kentucky. Again, I was in favor, and I know you were too, Bethany, of the Dobbs decision because we both believe that the federal government shouldn't do anything except for regulate interstate commerce and provide for the common defense. And they suck at doing even those two things, like the last 20 years of just brutal wars overseas, you know, and all the other. You're giving. I know I'm very passionate about the wars. Yeah, I'm very passionate about the wars, and I always take an opportunity to remind our listeners that these wars, the CIA is a giant terrorist organization. There it is. All right. So, anyways, that's beside the point. So again, we were all in favor of the Dobbs decision because that took away the ability of the federal government to impose that decision on everybody in the country. There's 330 million people. The federal government shouldn't be making any of those decisions at all. And so when it was devolved back to the state, that was a step in the right direction. And Kentucky did have a trigger law. In effect, it was that 2021 law that was passed by our Republican legislature in Kentucky. And this section is going to kind of give the background on that. And I want to read this real quick to give you listeners the context for the actual text of the bill. So this is what the writers of the article say. When Kentuckians file into voting booths in about 3 weeks, it will have been roughly 4 months since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down federal abortion protections and handed the regulatory reins to states. Kentucky's Republican-controlled General Assembly was poised to strike with its trigger law. I'm sorry, this was passed in 2019, not 2021, and signed into law by former Republican Governor Matt Bailout Bevin.
Yep,
that guy was a loser, and he wasn't from Kentucky. Just to make that point here, it bans all abortions except in cases where the life of the pregnant person is at risk in an effort to protect unborn human beings. There are no exceptions for rape, incest, or fetal anomalies. Doctors who provide abortions outside this context face a Class D felony. And this trigger law, the one that was just outlined, as well as a 6-week ban on abortions, the fetal heartbeat law, immediately became enforceable by Republican Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who I think is thinking about a governor run next year when we have our gubernatorial elections. When the nation's high court overturned Roe v. Wade in late July, both laws were promptly challenged in court by Kentucky's two outpatient abortion providers, Planned Parenthood and EMW Women's Surgical Center. So, do you have any thoughts on the trigger law as it was originally intended, or what would you? I mean, what do you think about all that?
I think the trigger law is kind of seedy too. Again, I'm personally against abortion, but we have a judicial system to review murders in this country. Like, if you kill someone, you have to go in front of a court and they review all kinds of things. And people will say, oh, well, self-defense. Or people will say, that, one size doesn't fit all here. And so then we're going to say, oh, but in abortion, one size fits all. Let's go ahead and put this on everyone and say that, now it's nebulous. What we can decide, was the mother's life at risk? Who decides that? Is it the same for everyone? I just think it gets a little seedy.
Yeah.
And dangerous.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And then too, thinking about the fact that like a law passed in 2019, which was essentially at that point a virtue signaling law from the Republicans, because I don't think that anyone thought I didn't even think at the beginning of 2022 that Roe versus Wade was ever going to go away. I think this came as this was just as much of a shock to the conservatives as it was to the progressives. And so this was obviously a virtue signaling law. And one of the problems that I have with the trigger ban is kind of like you said, not only is this, I don't believe in virtue legislation. I think that if you're going to enact legislation, it should actually have some sort of purpose. And then two, if a Roe versus Wade was ever to be overturned, as it was, in the summer of this year, then it doesn't give states the opportunity to really think through how they're going to implement that. It's just like, well, we plan this thing out years ahead of time, and as soon as the government overturns Roe, then with the snap of a finger, it's done, without kind of thinking about all of the effects that might have.
And I think health of the mother is can be looked at in very different ways. Not just like, oh yes, is her life at risk? Like, if she's in a bad situation, then yes, her life's at risk, and then the baby's life is at risk. Like, haven't looked at any of these statistics, but say she has to have the baby could die no matter what because of the poor living conditions that it would be in, or then enter into the terrible foster system that we have. And again, I'm not saying that that girl should have an abortion. I'm just saying that when you say something like the life of the mother is in danger, you have to look at that on all sides, not just what you think is okay when you have done nothing to help any of these women on a regular basis. Yeah,
that's the thing. I would love to see how many of our state representatives that voted for the trigger laws
volunteering to help these women out of poverty in the first place.
Right.
Or helping women in general.
Right. Or who give the charity. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Well, and again, that's always been like our criticism of, the progressive left as well. It's like, these people have all these high-minded ideals about what society should be like, but like a lot of like the progressive people that we know, even a lot of our progressive friends
volunteer for no organization.
They never volunteer. They never give their money. They never put their time into anything like that. And I think that a part of it is predicated on this idea that you're a virtuous person if you vote for politicians that promise to do that for you, but you're not. Like, if you are serious about these issues, and if you're serious about making a difference in the world, then you have to do those things yourself. Like, you can't just sit on the bench and watch somebody else do it. Like, you need to be out there fighting for it yourself, or you really don't have a right to criticize somebody that has a different perspective on you. So the hypocrisy is both a left and a right problem.
The biggest thing you can do for abortion, or anything that you feel strongly about, is work on it in your own home. And if you feel strongly about something, make sure that your kids know what you feel strongly about, and put your money and your time where your mouth is, and educate them on how you feel that it should go.
Yeah.
And then still expect your kids to make mistakes. It's going to happen.
Right. Well, and that's it. And like, we're obviously not here to give anyone parent advice, because we're just, we're
barely into this.
Right. I mean, we have one kid too, which is like,
we're half parents.
Yeah, we're kind of parents. It's enough that we get to celebrate Mother's and Father's Day, and our friends that don't have any kids think that we're martyrs for the cause. Like, we have just enough children to reach that threshold, but we're not real parents. Like, we don't have more than one. All right. But I just really feel like this is the reason why it's important to talk to your kids about your values. And it's amazing to me how many how many even like libertarian oriented people that are socially conservative, kind of like we are. Like, I would say that we're socially conservative, or we're traditional, in that sort of sense. And I think even a lot of libertarian oriented people that are socially conservative don't ever share their values with their kids. And even though our daughter's young, like, we've already talked to her about like sexuality in an age appropriate kind of way. But I just think it's really important as a parent that you try to instill those values into your kid as a young age, instead of waiting until they're 17 or 18 years old and already making mistakes.
And then also, from the Protestant lens, like, the fact that we think that one sin is worse than the other is just still appalling. Like, we can't say that, oh, well, you had an abortion, so you're going to hell, and Jesus doesn't forgive this sin. Not this one in particular, but, he'll do the other ones. You can have a closet addiction and it's fine. Right. But if you have abortion, it's over.
Right. Yeah, I'm completely with you on that, and that was one of the really great things that Michael Gorman pointed out in his book on abortion that we talked about in episode 10. Is like, if you look at the early church up until Constantine ruined absolutely everything for the church for all time, the church's position on abortion was that it's completely contradictory towards Christian values. But if a woman goes through an abortion, then the church needs to show her grace, because again, Jesus dies. Yeah, it's like Paul says in Romans 3: "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but are justified freely as a gift through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus." It's like, that.
But let's let the government regulate that for us, right? Does this make any sense?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I do think the government should be out of the business of morality altogether.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make any sense. So anyways, we'll get around to the text of the bill here in a second. Let's continue to look at the background here. So it says, the crux of their challenge hinges on the claim that access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care, which includes abortion, is a protected right under the Kentucky Constitution. This is Planned Parenthood's position on the issue. Banning the procedure or arbitrarily restricting it after a fetal heartbeat is detected around the 6-week mark violates an individual's rights to privacy and bodily autonomy, they argue. Which, again, like, I don't agree with Planned Parenthood, but I definitely do think that this is a problem, especially from the progressive or kind of the non-Christian libertarian perspective.
I don't have to tell an employer that I'm pregnant. I shouldn't have to tell anyone that I'm pregnant.
Right. Yep. I get it. They go on. A Jefferson County circuit judge, and Jefferson County is Louisville for all of you guys who are outside of Kentucky. So it's like fake Kentucky. Lexington and Louisville are like, they're like fake Kentucky.
They're not fake.
They're not fake Kentucky. We have a lot of friends that live in Lexington and Louisville, and they're all wonderful
and we
people.
love them.
We do. We love them very much. A Jefferson County circuit judge found legal merit in that argument in late July and temporarily blocked Cameron from enforcing either ban until the matter is resolved in court. So again, that was kind of the stay on this trigger law that they're going to be debating in November, I think, at the judicial level. The fundamental right for a woman to control her own body free from governmental interference outweighs a state interest in potential fetal life before viability, Jefferson County Judge Mitch Perry wrote in his ruling. A legal volley has ensued in the roughly 2 months since, and tensions over abortion access have hit a boiling point because people get mad about everything. In late July, Cameron, who is running for governor, asked higher courts for a second time to throw out Judge Perry's order and allow him to enforce both bans. After an initial denial from both the Kentucky Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court, the appeals court granted a second request in late July. Cameron expressed his thanks to the court for allowing him to continue to vigorously defend the constitutionality of these protections for women and unborn children across the Commonwealth. Kentucky's abortion providers appealed that ruling to Kentucky Supreme Court, whose justices are scheduled to hold oral arguments on the case beginning November 15th, a week after the general election. If the constitutional amendment passes, it will narrow or potentially eliminate state Supreme Court justices' ability to read the Kentucky Constitution as containing a right to abortion. Although personally, as a libertarian, if you look at the history of Supreme Courts at the state level and the United States Supreme Court, they always seem to find a way to overcome these constitutional limitations that are placed on their power. So I'm skeptical as to whether or not the court actually loses the power to rule on these decisions. And that anything about that before we take a look at the bill?
No, I mean, it's the privacy thing, the autonomy thing. Like that's really important because yes, unfortunately, abortion comes with that you can have that. But if we lose that privacy and that autonomy, then we lose a lot of things. So I don't think they may be trying to attack abortion on this, but it comes with a lot more if it's changed in the Constitution.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Well, let's take a look at the constitutional proposal. And so this is the unofficial copy that's on the state legislature's website, a draft of the proposed constitutional amendment. And again, I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes if you want to look at it for yourself. It's only like 15 lines long. It's not very long. But here's what it says: an act proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Kentucky related to abortion, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Section 1, it is proposed that a new section be added to the Constitution of Kentucky to be numbered as 26A and to read as follows. And here's the constitutional amendment. This would be included in the Constitution. To protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. And then they go on to explain how it's going to look in the law. It says this amendment shall be submitted to the voters of the Commonwealth for their ratification or rejection at the time and in the manner provided for under sections 256 and 257 of the Constitution and then under another state statute. The question to be submitted to voters shall read as follows. So this is what we're going to see on the ballot in 2 weeks. or I guess in 1 week by the time we air this. Are you in favor of amending the Constitution of Kentucky by creating a new section of the Constitution to be numbered Section 26A to state as follows: to protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion? Bethany, I'm going to let you go first. What are your, like, upon reading this text, all right, the amendment to the Constitution, what are your initial thoughts about the way that it's being presented on the ballot?
I mean, it's appealing to people who are obviously against abortion, because I don't want to fund abortion either. I don't want my tax dollars going to fund Planned Parenthood. I have a lot of issues with Planned Parenthood, and most of them don't even involve abortion. But I don't want my money going to a government-funded, project. However, I don't think it's worded to even talk about the other side. It's like leading the witness here in the way that it's worded.
Yeah, and again, I think this is my problem with almost all legislation, is that there are actually two issues that are rolled up into this amendment that I think should be separated into two separate issues. So the second part of this clause on requiring the funding of abortion, honestly, you could put requiring the funding of literally anything.
I would say no.
Yeah, including public education. You should go back and listen to my episode on Teacher 10. I'm a public education teacher, right? But I don't believe that the state should be funding any of these things. And honestly, if the amendment was that nothing in this Constitution will be construed as requiring the funding of abortion,
great. Yes,
I would push the button so hard that I would break the machine.
However, it's not. They're just going to wrap it all up in the same bill.
Yeah, and again, you kind of brought this up earlier, and I think that this is really important. Number one, to protect human life. Obviously, this is a constitutional amendment that is drafted from a particular philosophical perspective, right? And again, I think that philosophical perspective is true. I do believe that life begins at conception, and I think that the primary biological function of sexuality is reproduction. I do believe that it's a human life.
Agrees with us.
That's exactly right, and that's based on my Christian presuppositions. And so, why would I want to vote for an amendment that enshrines my theological values? And again, I'm fine with living in a society that reflects my theological values if people voluntarily accept them. I'm not in favor of living in a society where those values are imposed upon other people.
Yeah, because we don't
state.
Live in fake Kentucky. We don't live in Louisville. It's a different world down there.
It is. And again, Louisville is, it's culturally and philosophically, millions of miles away from where it might be 90 miles down the road, but it's so far away from where we're at right now. And so just the wording of this already kind of presupposes
everyone is the same.
Yes.
Everyone wants this to happen.
Right.
And everyone wants to use their money to fund it.
That's exactly right. And then the other thing that you talked about earlier, I think that there are two things with this securing or protecting a right to abortion. Number one, the biggest problem is that abortion is not defined. No. And this has always been a problem with constitutionalism in general. And I'm a big fan of limiting the government through a constitution. I think it's really important. But if you go back to even the United States Constitution, the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which was originally designed to make sure that goods passing from one state to another state that had to go through an intermediate or a middle state wouldn't be excessively taxed. That's all the Commerce Clause means. But literally every single business regulation that the federal government has ever imposed has been hung on that clause because they did not define what the regulation of interstate commerce entailed. And so the concern is that if there's not a definition of abortion, it's going to leave the door wide open.
It's under reproductive rights. And I mean, I did a brief Wikipedia search, which is super,
a lot better these
super
days.
Reliable.
Yeah.
I think even the Wikipedia article was like, please do not rely on this article for factual information. However, there's been a really long past for reproductive rights. And if you put abortion as just a termination of pregnancy, if that's how it's defined underneath reproductive rights, then that opens the door for so many things that are not what you and I consider abortion, because you and I would consider it as, I do not want this child anymore.
Right.
And again, that comes from our worldview.
Right.
But it also could just mean that I'm in trouble, the mother's life is at risk, or we just have to terminate this pregnancy. Right. That can also be defined as an abortion.
Right. Absolutely, and again, this goes back to the point that Michael Gorman makes in his book over and over again, that like all of the it's almost universal within Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity that like what we would call convenience abortions, which are actually quite common in the ancient world, and they used a lot of the same methods that we use for abortion today. They were always completely illegitimate from the perspective of a Jew or a Christian, in the first century. However, there were kind of rigorous debates within both communities, and Gorman provides the evidence for this in his book. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were debates within these communities as to whether or not an exception should be made if the woman's life was in danger. And I certainly believe, and I know that there are some diehard, anti-abortion people that wouldn't, but I certainly believe that if the mother's life is in danger, that is a legitimate case in which the baby should be terminated, especially if the mother already has other children that she's responsible for at home. And I know that's a horrible, horrible position for people to be put in, but it does happen. And I wouldn't want this constitutional amendment to someday be interpreted by the legislature as banning, as banning.
Well, not only that, if you look at reproductive rights, it's all about timing of when you can have a kid. You and I were in control of when we wanted to have our child. I didn't have to go through the government to tell me this is the time that you. So you've got a teenager who is in a tough situation, and now she's no longer in control of her body because of, terrible circumstances, either through rape. And I know that is few and far between, but that took away her control of when she's able to have a child. And again, now my personal beliefs would not have an abortion, but I'm not in that position. Like, I don't have to make that choice. Right. I was in control, and we can't take away control or one day have someone say, oh, now I want everyone to have babies when they're 35 instead of whenever you want. It just opens the door for worse things to happen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And again, for those of you guys, and I know that there are libertarians that are going to disagree with this take. And like I said, that's fine. And if you're one of those people that would like to come on to the show and explain your position on, I would love to have you on. Let me know. I really do. I really do understand kind of the other side of this. But it does seem from my perspective that this is a very clear imposition of government upon our personal lives. And again, like if I know that there are people that out there that being very rational and very reasonable would say, well, the government of the state of Kentucky would never, ever take away the ability of the right to a woman to abort a child if her life was in danger.
They made us stay home for a year.
Well, and I'm really glad that you got around to that, because I remember a time when the Supreme Court of Kentucky said that our authoritarian governor, Andy Beshear, had the right to impose all of these draconian lockdown measures on the state of Kentucky and forced our very young daughter to wear a mask to school for a year and a half without any sort of scientific evidence. And our Supreme Court said that it was completely constitutional for him to destroy the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of people living in the state of Kentucky. And again, I understand that that the legislative branch actually did what they could to fight back against that. And I understand that we're talking about different branches of government here with this, but you cannot
assume that these people are going to be great.
Right.
And I just think we're too far down the road to start saying, well, yes, you know what, like, no one would ever do that. Or like, we're too far down the road in abortion to start like having these conversations to say, oh, well, it just shouldn't happen. And, people need to understand that abortion is murder. And like, yes, I personally agree with that. But we live in a broken world. Right. This is going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
We're not going to stop abortion from happening.
We're not.
It's going to happen no matter what. And it's up to the individual to make a choice, in my opinion. And I know that as a Christian, like, we shouldn't have, other people, murdering other people for those who say abortion is murder. But again, like, is it okay for someone to murder in self-defense? It's a slippery slope. And we shouldn't be trying, as Christians, we shouldn't be trying to control other people's lives. That's not what God called us to do.
I completely agree. Yeah, we have to convince people to voluntarily accept, the precepts of our faith. And again, this is one of the points. It all comes, and this is what libertarianism is at heart. Nothing more than a critique of power. That's it. It's the philosophical acknowledgement, and I think it's a deeply Christian philosophical acknowledgement. It goes back to Genesis chapter 3 and the man and woman in the garden being given the opportunity to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then taking that opportunity. That when you create institutions that give people the possibility, the opportunity to abuse power, 9 times out of 10, unless that person is very virtuous, they're going to abuse the power. And this is something that you get both in kind of like philosophy with Friedrich Nietzsche, who kind of disaggregated a lot like the philosophical issues surrounding power in the late 1900s, and then within the libertarian movement, like Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom is all about how when institutions exist that people can manipulate and take advantage of, they will manipulate and take advantage of those systems to meet their own ends. And again, like we live in a state where you can't buy marijuana, and where you can't open up a casino, and where the government locked us all in our houses for 6 months. And
they'll be good about this one.
This
one would be different.
Right. Yeah, again,
we can change them.
Right. And no, I mean this is like not defining abortion here is it's unlocking the door, and eventually somebody will come and open it. That's
right. And we have a young daughter, and I don't want her to grow up in a society that could eventually, I mean, okay, this is a stretch, but in China, they've said, we don't want girls to be born,
Yeah.
And so just eventually it's a slippery slope when you change, your choice that when you can have a child, what child you have, like it's just a slippery slope when people get into power.
Right. I completely agree.
Kentucky is not China. I get that.
Right. No. Yeah. No. Kentucky is not China. But again, if you think about what's happening at the federal level, like Woodrow Wilson ruined the 20th century, and I think everything else after that too. And so if you look at from the 19-teens on, the constant growth of the federal government, it's
alarming.
not. And again, and a lot of libertarians acknowledge this implicitly, which is why most libertarians celebrated the downfall of Roe versus Wade, because it was one of the few times that the Supreme Court actually acted as a check on the executive and legislative. And it doesn't happen very often. And in fact, if you look at the last 100 years of American history, the Supreme Court has almost always been a rubber stamp for the massive expansion of federal power. And as we see more and more of these issues being decided at the federal level, and more both, quote unquote conservatives and progressives willing to resort to authoritarian measures to impose their values on the rest of the country, I do think that the potential for these imperial overreaches at home are going to be there. And again, you look at Canada, you look at Australia, you look at all of these countries and the way that Justin Trudeau and the way that they responded to COVID. It's not a far-fetched possibility that there would be people in the future that would try to make these decisions for us, which again is kind of the great argument for like decentralization, that we shouldn't give anyone at any like high level of power the opportunity to make these decisions.
If they really wanted to make this about abortion and they were concerned about the lives of unborn children, they would make it about abortion, but they didn't. They made it about funding. They made it about what they want, the power that they want. And again, I think you had, you're gonna hate me. I don't know which episode this was of the podcast, but I promise I'm a faithful listener.
My number one fan.
But you had Ezra
Wierig
on the show.
I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm sorry, Ezra. You're such a good dude.
And he talked about like this should be at community levels, and this should, because even you can't blanket statement this over all of Kentucky, because just certain populations are different. And the fact that you put the government in charge of when you can have a child, this is nuts. And everyone's like, oh, but we can't kill babies. Yes. Like, I think we all agree no one wants to kill a baby. That's terrible.
We would hope so.
But like, people aren't walking around hoping that they can have an abortion here.
Right.
Like, we think that everyone is terrible and we're putting all of our emotions into this. But in reality, like, people are in terrible situations, and it's our job as Christians in our communities to help these people out, not the government.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, too, to your point, I think one of the pieces of this puzzle that the progressives often miss is that there's kind of this assumption that abortion is like kind of, for affluent working class white collar women.
Convenience abortion.
Yeah, convenience abortion.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's not. Like, abortion disproportionately affects women of minority and women that are in poverty. Like, that's the target market there. And it's really hard to see how, from a progressive perspective, you can justify abortion holes, shouting your abortion, celebrating your abortion, when this is killing like black babies, and it's killing the babies of poor people. It just seems like it's very inconsistent to say that you have this grandiose conception of social justice, but then also support a policy that is at least in some measure kind of like a little racist. And this is the point that I like Larry Elder. He's a really consistent conservative who's black. And he has a lot of great cultural commentary. And this is the point that he constantly makes, is like abortion targets black women.
Yes.
Like abortion targets black women. And it's inconsistent with the philosophical principles of social justice, if you're into that kind of thing.
And again, if you want to help any of these people, put your money and your time where your mouth is. If you're really concerned, there's a million volunteer organizations.
Right. I completely agree. I want to get to that in just a second. There's kind of one more point I want to make to this as we get ready to wrap this up today. But going back to the episode that we had with Bill Schultz, and I know that Bill is a Catholic and I think he has a different perspective than me on this issue. Although I'd have to ask him in person. And Bill, you're always welcome back to talk about it if you want, because you're a great guy. But what Bill is running for city councilor in Crescent Springs, Kentucky. If you haven't listened to the episode, I would highly recommend going back and doing that. And if you live in Crescent Springs, for the love of all things that are holy, please vote for Bill, because he is such a great guy. But one of the points that he makes in that episode, which I think is a really good point, is that things should work differently at the local level, and there are issues that libertarians should always be against at the federal and the state levels that they might not necessarily be against at the local level. And really the only form of government that works is local government. And so and this is kind of my big point. I think that making a decision about abortion at the state level is too high of a level to make that decision. Now, when it came to the city of Independence, like where we live in Kentucky,
I would vote no.
If Independence had an amendment to our charter or whatever, where they said we are not going to ever allow an abortion clinic to open up in Independence, yes, I'm going to vote for that in a heartbeat, because I don't want one of those in my community. I don't want one in my backyard. Does it matter to me if there's an abortion clinic in Louisville or Lexington?
Nope.
No, it does not.
Or even in Florence or...
It doesn't. And here's the thing. I feel like there is this perception by people that are very conservative that they think that if abortion is completely made legal, that the market is big enough that there'll be an abortion clinic on every corner. And this isn't like everyone loves liquor. Okay. All right. Everyone. Well, not everyone. All right. But a lot of us love liquor. I want to be able to buy myself a bottle of bourbon and, whatever. So there's a giant market for that. So the market economy can sustain a liquor store on every corner, right? Even though there are parts of Kentucky that you still can't buy liquor, which just goes to show you how messed up, But anyways, I think the thing about abortion is that there's not that big of a market for it. I think it's overplayed, and there's no way that even if it was completely legal everywhere, we would not see abortion clinics on every corner.
Abortions, I think people get the statistics wrong, and I haven't looked any up, which this is already a contradiction. Right. However, let's think about it. Are people just walking around having convenience abortions? No. What % of abortions are because someone's health is in danger, or people are in a bad situation? Yeah. Unfortunately, that solution to an issue of a woman's life being in danger also comes with people abusing the power. Just like people are going to abuse liquor. Just like there are some people that are going to abuse marijuana. Right.
Gambling. You're
gambling. Right. But, people can still gamble. That destroys lots of lives.
It does.
But no one's screaming over the casinos. I just think you can't pick and choose.
Right.
And people are going to abuse anything that you have out there.
Yeah.
Because we live, again, I'm just going to say it again, we live in a broken world.
Right.
And why do we think we can fix something that it took Jesus to do? We're like, oh, but we can fix this abortion issue by voting.
Right, yeah.
Jesus had to die on a cross, but we're going to fix it by voting and feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think the thing that I want to kind of end on today, because I know that this was something that we were both really kind of passionate about. I'm going to see if I can bring it up here in the article. Oh yeah, here it is. How much money has been spent by political action groups like Planned Parenthood on this issue? So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs here because this is really interesting. It says, by October 12th, Protect Kentucky Access and Yes for Life, which are obviously the two campaigns on either side of constitutional amendment number number 2, had collectively raised more than $3.6 million.
It's quite a bit of money in Kentucky terms.
No.
quite a bit of money.
No. I mean, I know if you live in Illinois or New York, California, that won't get you a 2-bedroom apartment. But in Kentucky, $3.6 million is real money.
That's a McMansion over here.
All right, that's real money. All right, and so the bulk of Yes for Life's money has come from religiously affiliated groups like the Kentucky Baptist Convention and the
Alarming.
And this is great. The Kentucky Baptist Convention and the Catholic Conference of Kentucky, which it is so great to see the Baptists and the Catholics
just getting
working
together.
I know. Well, and again, in the libertarian world, we're you go to the Libertarian Party of Canton County, we're very ecumenical. We got Catholics, we got Protestants, we got atheists, we got everyone, we don't discriminate. But outside of the libertarian world, it's very rare for Baptists and Catholics to get along, and so I guess it's this is something that's bringing the Baptists and the Catholics together. So there's that, which have fronted hundreds of thousands of dollars, but Protect Kentucky Access has raised close to 5 times as much as its opponent group, raking in more than $3 million, compared with Yes for Life $620,000, according to Kentucky Registry of Election Finance filings. It would be really interesting to see where the Protect Kentucky Access is getting their money from. I'm sure that there's a lot of powerful federal money coming from there. The PKA has major funding support from Planned Parenthood. There it is, and the American Civil Liberties Union.
Who funds Planned Parenthood? We do.
And close to 90 people who list themselves as physicians who have also donated nearly $53,000 to defeat the Constitution. So I wonder why abortion physicians would want to give money to this. Is it because they make money on abortions? Probably.
I mean, they can donate their money. The physicians don't bother me. Churches bother me because you're going to spend that much money on just being cantankerous and opposing something. How much I would like to see, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. How much money are you giving to organizations that are helping women and men? Let's not forget that it takes 2 to tango, people, and a father should have a right to a child as well. How are they helping families in their community? And I know some churches do, and I'm not going to be anti that. And some people don't know where their money goes, but you should look that up.
Well, and I want to make the point here too that I have a ton of respect for the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church really does put its money where its mouth comes from on these issues, and the Catholic Church has been consistently pro-life. I mean, for a long time.
I get still, you're going to spend money. Where did the money go? Printing signs,
right?
Where's the money going?
Yep. No,
ridiculous.
I
spend it helping people.
Right. No,
personal opinion.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Again, like I said, the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church funds a lot of these foster care, and everything. So the Catholic Church really has always done an excellent job.
And their community mobilizes to help those around them.
And honestly, I think just if you're a Protestant that's listening to this show right now, Protestants can learn a lot from the Catholic Church about community. We do it really, really bad for them. Now, our church is pretty great, but it really is. Our church is really good at that, but a lot of Protestant churches aren't invested in their community, and they don't try to build communities, and they don't put their money where their mouth is in the way that the Catholic Church does. So I have respect for that, because at least they're being consistent. But there is a lot of money that I think is wasted on these political issues. And again, if we got rid of the mechanism of power, if this wasn't an issue, that money,
could go to help people in poverty.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's all good.
To not get them in the situation in the first place.
Right. Yeah, as all good Austrians know, opportunity cost is a real thing. If you spend your money on one thing, that means you can't spend it on something else.
It's not going to eliminate anything. This is always going to happen.
Yeah, no, I
Always.
can, right. It will. And again, this is why I think that ultimately these decisions need to be decentralized and made at the most local level possible.
Yeah, the government should not be involved. And that's the real issue behind this, because again, I don't want my funding going to support Planned Parenthood, although I do spend my money on other brands that I'm sure are terrible. So my money goes to other things that I don't appreciate. And I don't believe in abortion. Personally, would not have an abortion. However, this is a different issue, which is why we are going to probably vote no, because the issue is not even really about, even the funding. They want to take away and get more power so they can control things in the future. And that is a slippery slope that the government should not be involved in. The timing of when people can have children, and they need to define what abortion is. So it's unfortunate that, we have to vote this way and our money is still going to go to Planned Parenthood. However, it's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
But Kentucky has put us in an impossible situation once again.
Yes,
Still love the Commonwealth.
Right. No, Kentucky's a great state. It's beautiful here. I highly recommend it for all of you guys that live outside of the state for sure. No, I completely agree with that, and I think that's a really good summary to kind of close on here. And again, the issue is really complicated, and just like with all political issues, there's just not enough nuance and not enough thought. Now, again, I do want to say that I know that there are libertarians that listen to this that are on the other side of the issue, and like I said, I think that there is a world where, and maybe there are people that listen to the show that are libertarians that have a better take on this issue than I do.
Please let us know.
Yeah,
we would love to know.
Absolutely. And again, I know that by the time this episode airs, we're only going to have 7 days before the election. But like, if you have a different perspective on this and you want to come on and talk about it,
how Kentucky's defining abortion,
right? Yeah, or maybe we missed it. I've read a few articles on this, but maybe I missed how that works. Like, I would love to hear the other libertarian
just
side.
To get through the weeds of, you either want to fund Planned Parenthood or you want to kill babies, and you want to take away rights from women. Just trying to sift through this for the people of Kentucky to make a decent decision on this amendment.
Right. Well, and this is, and I can totally agree with that. And this is one of the beautiful things about libertarian philosophy in general, is that in the libertarian world, you can have nuance and you can have disagreements and you can have debates about these issues. And like, it's okay. Like, I understand that somebody that votes yes for this issue from a libertarian perspective is doing it from a principled, well thought out, well reasoned perspective. And I have nothing but respect for those people. I just see the issue a little bit differently. And that's why I'm choosing to vote no. Yeah. So, Bethany, any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
I'm Bethany Bernardo, and I approve this message.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for being my first ever guest host.
And number one fan.
And my number one fan. And also, you're my financial supporter, because you have a real job and I am a teacher. So
real job.
I really appreciate that, Bethany. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Not a problem. I love you.
I love you too. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it for this week. Thank you all so much for hanging on. Again, I'm dead serious. If you're listening to this and you have a different take on this issue, reach out to me on Twitter. You can follow me at ProLibertyPod. If you're not already doing that, I would highly recommend you do so. I have a very positive account. I don't get into a lot of mean political fights or religious fights or theological fights on Twitter. You can also email me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. And again, we'll try to get something together if you want to get something out before Election Day. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. As always, I really appreciate you guys hanging in with me, and we will see you all next Tuesday. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about the show, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at ProLibertyPod. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at ProLibertyPod. You can also support the show by leaving a rating or a review on your favorite podcast app. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.